I want to talk just a little bit about disgust with you this morning. Perhaps if you're the squeamish type, this may not be your moment. So just look at Facebook on your phone or whatever, just about 2 or 3 minutes, all right? But I do want to talk about disgust and what disgusts us. So I'm going to have a couple people in the front row help me out. Bobby, would you help me out? Yeah, Bill, you went to Double Dare this week, right? Yeah, so you're kind of used to disgust. Why don't you just take your seat, sit right there. LaTanya, go ahead, right there. Just go ahead and take a seat. You guys don't have to show anyone anything because I really don't want to gross anyone out today. That's not the point. So imagine all of you that you have a cup like my folks in the front row, okay? Imagine you have a cup in your hand, and I asked you to spit in it. Yeah, we're a little grossed out, right? How many of you, did you grow up playing sports and spitting on the field? Any of you? Yeah, okay. And so, did you have a mom who would yell at you every time you do it running down the field? Oh, it's gross, stop it, oh. That was my growing up, all right? So I was taught that spit was disgusting, right? So if you all just imagine you had a cup right now and I asked you to spit in it. Now, you guys don't have to, but just imagine you had to spit in it, right? Okay, so you've spat in your cup, right? Now, if I asked you to drink that, what would your response be? Yeah, kind of grossed out, right? I mean, it's pretty gross to imagine drinking spit, isn't it? But I have a question for you, seriously. Those of you who have disgust, you can put your phone away now. Why is it that before it comes out of your mouth, you're perfectly okay with drinking that same exact thing? So when it's in your mouth, it's saliva, right? Right? And we spend our entire day drinking our saliva, right? I mean, I'm sorry, this is biology. I'm not trying to be gross, but when it's in our mouth, we have to. I mean, otherwise we would drown ourselves, right? It's natural for us to spend our entire day dealing with the saliva that our mouth makes. But just as soon as we take a cup, spit in it, we won't do what we spend our entire day doing. There's some irony there, right? Right? So what happens in the magical cup that you now won't drink what you spent your entire day drinking? What happened? Why is that? What changed? Yeah. It's kind of weird when you start thinking about it. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? But I think the answer is that when it's in our mouth, it's on the inside. And as soon as it leaves our mouth, it becomes on the outside. It's just as simple as that. It's just as simple as that. You can begin to think of a lot of bodily functions. Like if you're rushing to the gas station to go to the bathroom, you're not repulsed by the fact that you have refuse in your body, right? But as soon as you put it in the toilet, you want to flush that down. Right? But you're not on the way to the bathroom thinking of how gross and dirty you are. Right? So there's something psychologically about ourselves that what is on the inside is okay and what is on the outside is disgusting. Right? Something psychologically about this. And this very thing begins to extend to communities and peoples and groups, nations. What is on the outside is gross and what is on the inside is okay. What's on the inside may be gross, but it's our inside, so we'll put up with it. Right? So this is just a psychological basic fact. And this is the sort of world that Ruth lived in. Insiders and outsiders. Disgust and okay. This is the world that Ruth lived in. But Ruth's world is particularly interesting because she starts as an insider, and because of her loyalty, she moves towards outsider. Now that's an interesting and backwards turn. We're used to stories of people who have it all and lose it all, but Ruth decides she's going to move from Moab back to her mother-in-law's hometown. So let's read that story together if we can. Ruth chapter 1. We're going to read the whole chapter to set the stage. And I invite you to join me in standing as we read the word of the Lord this morning. Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife, had 2 sons. They went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Epaphrodites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab to live there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her two sons and her husband. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughter-in-laws prepared to return home from there. With her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set back on the road to take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought that there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn my back with you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that the Lord was determined to go with her, that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me, and the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Naomi, for what it's worth, is Hebrew for pleasant. And so when they call her Naomi, they call her pleasant, and she says, "No, I'm bitter. Call me bitter." Aren't you glad that we don't have a custom where we ask people to call us by the emotion that we're currently exuding? Yeah, that'd be pretty rough. Some of you would just be salty. Just kidding. The story of Ruth is a fascinating one. We could just preach this chapter and talk about all sorts of things that are happening. But what we have essentially is a man from Judah, one of the tribes of Israel, who Judah is kind of central and south in this map. Here to the right is the Dead Sea, and on the other side is Moab. There is a famine in the land of Judah, and so Elimelech and his wife decide to take their two boys and move out of country to the other side of the Dead Sea so that they could provide and feed their family. But in the time that they move out there, their boys grow up and they marry local women, Moabite women, which is typically considered to be problematic in Jewish culture. They believe that they are the people of God, that they should be marrying within their own race, with their own people, and yet Elimelech has made this decision for the sake of food and survival to go to this foreign land, and his sons end up marrying foreign women. And this all comes to a head and becomes a problem when all of the men in the family die. Father, sons, and what we're left with is an old lady and 2 widows far before their time. This is problematic for multiple ways, but one of the most severe ways that this is problematic is now these women have lost their Social Security. They no longer have a retirement plan. There's no 501 whatever, 401(b), whatever they're called, 401k. There's no longer any of that for them. They are now left on their own to take care of themselves, and they have literally no way to do so. This is a recipe for poverty. And so one day, mom, Naomi, decides she's going to go back home, figuring she's got a better chance in her homeland where people may remember her than being a foreign woman in a foreign land without a husband who has a job. And so she goes to her 2 beautiful daughter-in-laws and she says, I'm going home. You all don't need to come with me. It's better for you to just remarry here. You're both beautiful. I think you'll find husbands. Why don't you just try to find new guys? I am old and wrinkled. I can't have babies anymore. It's not going to happen. I've got no future. I'm bitter. I'm going to go home. You 2 stay here. And while they all weep, one of them takes her up on her offer and stays home. But the other, Ruth, decides that she has to go and be with her mother-in-law. She has to care for her. Who's going to take care of her? She loves her. And so Ruth, who is at home in Moab, has prospects, has a chance at a future, throws all of that away to be with her mother-in-law. Some of you all should be convicted about how you feel about your mother-in-law. Ruth leaves her homeland to go with her mother-in-law to make sure that she'll be okay. She says, where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your gods will be my gods, and your people, my people. And she goes, and they return back to the hometown of Bethlehem. You may have heard of that city before. Yeah, maybe not. It's a place that Jesus guy was born. I don't know. So they go back to Bethlehem. And they arrive there, and people do remember Naomi. And they exclaim how happy they are to see her back. But that can't even lift her spirits. So she goes, I'm bitter. Call me bitter. And that's how she is received into her town. The next day, Naomi cooks up this scheme where Ruth should go to this land where their kinsmen live. They have this person in their family loosely connected to them named Boaz, and he appears to be very wealthy. And now that the drought is gone, the barley crop is rising, and there's going to be plenty of food. And so Naomi tells Ruth to go and work the edge of that land, gleaning what she can to bring back so that the 2 of them could eat. And so Ruth does just that. She works the edge of the land that Boaz owns. And I think that Naomi kind of thinks that something could happen here because she's always kind of scheming for Ruth to be seen by Boaz. And Boaz sees her and apparently is kind of into her because he starts asking who that is. And the answer is, of course, she's a Moabite woman. That's problematic because if you're a Jew who's of wealth, who has land, who has property, you shouldn't be marrying Moabite women. And so that really that probably should be the end of the romance right there. But he likes Ruth enough that he makes sure that she takes whatever she wants from the edge of her property, tells other women to make sure to throw her some barley here or there that she and Naomi could eat. And so they strike up a bit of a distant relationship, but there's definitely, if you read Ruth and you don't feel chemistry brewing the whole way through that story, I don't know that you're really reading it right. There's something kind of happening that's pregnant in the story about Ruth and Boaz through the entire thing. It's hinted at very heavily. And so Ruth keeps eating. She keeps getting food from the land. And finally, Naomi decides that she's going to invite Ruth to take it to the next level. I think she thinks that Boaz is just interested enough, and Boaz starts learning that there's maybe a loophole here because Naomi is her kin, and there's this old law in the Old Testament, in the first 5 books of our Bible, called the kinsman redeemer, where if someone falls upon poverty, it's your role. It's not really your right, it's your role to go and to save this family member. That becomes the social security of ancient Israel, that if you lose all of your ability to make money, someone in your family should take you in. And Boaz starts getting a hint that Naomi might just be this person, even though Ruth is a foreign woman. And so he starts getting interested, and Ruth goes to Naomi, and Naomi gives her quite the advice, if you ask me. Wash and perfume yourself, she says, and put on your best clothes. It's like ancient homecoming, right? Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, and when he's finished eating and drinking and he lies down, note the place that he's lying and go and uncover his feet and lie down. Now, I haven't been really that excited about talking about this part with you, really. There's a lot of debate out there about what in the world this means. So, the Hebrew language, the ancient Hebrew language, doesn't have the dictionary size that we have with the amount of words that we have. And so, there's a lot of conversation out there about what exactly the word feet means in this story. Like, there's a lot of people, reputable people, who would say that this is a euphemism for, like other parts. And so there's kind of, again, sort of an overtone here of sexual interest in each other. And basically that word feet translates to English as like the bottom part of you. Okay? I mean, that's really what it... So it's fair for us just to say, well, she uncovered his feet. But that's kind of weird too, isn't it? And so this whole thing is kind of hard to understand what's happening here. But again, like Boaz realizes something is uncovered, and he says thank you to her. And that's also pretty bizarre, if you ask me. So I don't know. No one really knows what's going on in this part of the story. But there's some courting happening of some level. Fill in your own gaps, okay? That's what I'm inviting you to do. Fill in your own gaps. And so whatever happens on the threshing floor, what happens on the threshing floor stays on the threshing floor. Whatever has happened in this story, Boaz wakes up the next morning in love. Take it for what it's worth. And so he then brings up this idea, like this is really good old school woman thinking, right? Plant the idea in his head and it'll happen. He comes up with this idea, hey, like we're kind of related, like with Naomi, like kinsman redeemer, right? I could take you into my family. And Ruth thinks that's great, but Boaz says there's one kinsman in town who's closer and tighter to Naomi than I am. And technically, based on the law, he has first crack at you all. Sometimes I don't understand ancient customs, but there it is. He has. So we move then to chapter 4, where there's this big courtroom scene in the middle of town. Boaz now wants the first kinsman redeemer, the one who is supposed to save Naomi and Ruth from poverty, to turn down his option to take them into his family, so that then Boaz can take them into his family and marry Ruth. This is his plan. And so he does this in the middle of town because there has to be witnesses for this contractual happening. So Boaz runs into this other guy in the center of Bethlehem, in the center of the city. And we're not even told his name, which I just think is super fascinating. We're just told that he's the kinsman redeemer that Boaz had mentioned. So he's a pretty bit player in this whole thing. And so Boaz runs into him in the middle of Israel, and he says, hey, listen, you know Naomi and Ruth, those people who've come back into town? Yeah, I know them. You're the first kinsman redeemer. Would you like to redeem them so that they won't live in poverty and they have a house to move into and a place to live? And he goes, yes, I would. How much will that cost me? And so they talk about how much it'll cost, and he says, oh, by the way, one more thing. If you do this, you're going to have to marry Ruth, that Moabite woman. And again, he is disgusted by this. And again, it's these stories that we get in the Old Testament are often originally told to each other in a culture where people just automatically get it. But the details are kind of sketchy here as to what disgusts him so much. But he is disgusted by this. And he says, I can't acquire it all. It'll ruin everything if I acquire this woman as my wife. That's what we're given in the text. It'll ruin everything. I can't do it. Can you redeem her, Boaz? Boaz says, well, yeah, I guess. It's going to fall to me. And so they do this whole thing where they pull off the shoe on their foot and give it to the other person to make the transaction legal. Again, I don't really understand what's happening here, but they pull shoes off, they hand shoes over, the transaction is legal, and now Ruth is taken into Boaz's house as his wife. Naomi, the one who was bitter, now has a home to be a part of. She's welcomed back in as family and now cared for under the umbrella of the house of Boaz. She is redeemed from her bitterness and her poverty and her fear of future. And Ruth, on the other hand, she is taken in as wife, and they have a child almost immediately. And that child's name is Obed. Again, if you're looking for a good biblical name to name that child of yours, Obed. No, I'd probably get made fun of in middle school, huh? And what's wild about this is that Obed has a child named Jesse, and Jesse has a child named David, who would become king of Israel. And so this foreign woman, who at one point or another is part of a negotiation as to whether or not she would be problematic to ruin a family, becomes the great-great-grandmother of the greatest king in the history of Israel. A woman who was from the outside, who disgusted some, was taken in by a kinsman redeemer and made legitimate by having a child with her, and her name gets inserted into the genealogies of all genealogies, both in ancient Israel and then also in the Christian faith. For if you were to open up the first chapter of Matthew today and begin the story of Jesus, you would find Ruth's name right there in the lineage of our Lord Jesus Christ. I mean, that is incredible redemption from poverty, from wandering, into the house of Boaz, into the story of David, and into the story of Jesus. If this story didn't happen, the story of David and the story of Jesus would not have happened in the way that it did. Ruth is redeemed from foreigner, from disgusting, from unable to redeem, unable to be taken, from wanderer, from poor beggar on the edges. She is redeemed into a family that is a powerhouse for the history of Israel. That is incredible redemption. So this story is what it is. It's a great story. It's a fun story. It's a lovely story. It's a story that Israel tells over and over and over. But what does it have to do with us? This idea of the kinsman redeemer that Boaz is, he's kind of an ancillary part of this story, but his willingness and ability to utilize his place and his power and his wealth to help people in need is an inspiring story, to say the least. And in some ways, he was doing just what the law asked him to do. But in other ways, he was going above and beyond to welcome the outsider into his family, that they would find salvation. And we find that in many ways, this is a foreshadowing of who Jesus will become for the people who are Gentiles and on the outside. You see, we did that spit test thing earlier where we talked about how we wouldn't drink our own spit, but when it's on the inside, it's okay. The Jews, I don't want to throw the Jews under the bus. They're pretty typical, but they kind of saw Gentiles in the same way, that inside of Israel, we've got our problems, but they're our problems. And the Gentiles on the outside, they're unclean, and they're a mess, and they're sinful, and they're idolatrous, on and on and on and on and on. And they had biblical basis to believe this. It's not like they were crazy. But this is how they saw the Gentiles, not much different than our own spit in a cup. And Jesus comes along, And he works, of course, in Israel, but he starts extending the borders, crossing outside of Israel and working with Gentiles. It's not long before there that Paul begins to describe that God has called him through Jesus Christ to go to Gentiles like you and I and declare that no matter how disgusting our sin has been in the past, we're now welcomed to be redeemed into the family. And Jesus goes so far as this that he's talked about in Hebrews. I got a text here like this. This is the author of Hebrews writing about Jesus. In bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it is fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. And so the people from the Holy Family are now equivalent to the ones who Jesus are making holy. This is a connection to this story of kinsman redeemer in the Old Testament. The Jews are the ones who are holy, but the Gentiles are the ones that God is working to make holy through Jesus Christ, his suffering, his death, his shed blood given for us, that we're told here that Jesus now is willing to consider us kin, family. Jesus looks upon you, and you may look upon you and see yourself much like the spit in the cup. You may see your sin. You may see the underbelly of your life. You may be ashamed and disgusted by what it is you produce. And you may be unwilling to digest who you are. But Jesus looks upon the disgust that we have for the way we behave at times, and he sees it as redeemable. He doesn't want to throw it out and just say it's worthless or no good. He looks upon our foreignness, our disgusting moments, the moments that we are ashamed of ourselves, and he says that's well worth taking into my family. And so just like Boaz did with Ruth, Jesus doesn't spit us out, but takes us in. He opens up his table, and he invites us not as welcome guests, but as insiders, as family. He becomes for us our kinsman redeemer, that through his sacrifice on the cross, we are welcome to become a part of his family, to sit at his table and find that there's no amount of disgust in our life too much to keep Christ from welcoming us in. So however it is you arrive today, you may find yourself bitter like Mara. You may find yourself sad, angry, disgusted, frustrated. You may look upon your life and have no self-esteem. You may believe you're not worth it. But Jesus looks upon you so very differently. He looks upon you like Boaz did upon Ruth. He saw something redeemable. And so he worked and he worked and he worked to bring her into her family, his family. And so does Christ with you. And so today we come to the table that our Lord prepared for us all those many years ago at his Last Supper before his death. He broke bread and he spilled wine, and he did so that he could prepare a table for sinners to come and sit with him, that no matter what we've done, no matter where we've been, no matter how many mistakes we made, we find that we are welcome at his table. And that when we come to his table and dine with him, we leave recognizing that we're not simply forgiven, but we are family with Jesus. That we're welcome, that we're under his umbrella, that he has redeemed us into his family, that we would be his children. Listen to these words that Paul wrote as we begin to prepare our hearts to come to the table prepared for us, that we would find redemption in the blood shed on our behalf. For I received from the Lord what I also pass on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. So the band is going to come out and my servers are going to come forward. I'm going to invite you to stand as the music begins, to exit out your left and to move forward. Receive the elements and return to your seat where you'll receive instructions for us to all receive them together at the end. But as you come today, don't stand in the line as an empty gesture. Don't just wait your turn, but think, ponder, imagine the power of the Lord God Almighty coming from heaven down to earth, that he would redeem you into his family. You, the way you are, how you've come today, the best and the worst parts, and receive with thanksgiving the gift of hospitality that our Lord gives to us today in this place.